Morning all, welcome to the Pyramid Podcast where three lads discuss all things the English football pyramid. On today's episode, we'll have a review of the Carabao Cup action and the boys' trip to Old Trafford. We'll preview the Premier League action, including a big game at St James's Park between Newcastle and Arsenal. We'll look ahead at the fixtures from the Championship, including the new Pyramid Pod Cup holders Southampton at Millwall, and Laura will talk us through Yeovil's FA Cup Round 1 tie hosting National League side Gateshead. I'm your host, Alex Murphy, and once again, I'm joined by Tom Lawrence and Tom Gallagher. Boys, we'll start with the Carabao Cup, and you boys obviously travelled up to Old Trafford for the game. Tom, I'll come to you first. Obviously looked pretty dire on TV, United's display, but Newcastle looked great. Bit of insight from being live at the stadium.
Where do I start? That is the worst I've ever witnessed in person. Go up a couple of times a season usually. And been lucky enough not to see us lose. But that was just honestly from front to back, manager, players, everything. It was terrible. I was really impressed with Lewis Hall and really impressed with Tino Livramento. They were unbelievable on the night, but it's basically a performance where I kind of start to think the players are down in tools to the extent where they almost want to get rid of the manager. And I'm starting to now put two and two together and thinking the reason why Harry Maguire didn't force a move in the summer might be because he thought that he'll last longer than Ten Hag. And exactly the same with Sancho now. Sancho's not apologising because he probably thinks that it's almost like they know something we don't, and it seems like the players are just not having him. But yeah, it's an utter shambles, mate, and I don't see it getting any better anytime soon.
Loro, obviously a bit more of a impartial view on it. United looked terrible, but you must have been impressed with Newcastle.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the caveat is it was second string against second string. I think United and Newcastle probably both made 7 or 8 changes, but yeah, my God, Newcastle second string is a lot better than United's, that's for sure. And I agree, Livramento was really good. Almiron didn't start, but he came on after like 5 minutes. They actually started Matt Ritchie and Matt Targett as the two sort of wide forwards Newcastle, which is quite cocky in itself, going to Old Trafford in a cup game. But Amron came on and just him and Willock sort of and Lewis Hall linking up down that left-hand side absolutely tore the lot to shreds. There's very, very little going forward from a Man United point of view to really be able to talk about. But every time Newcastle broke out, they just managed to put something together and take their chances, and they were a lot better. But one thing I noticed just about being at Old Trafford is I thought, particularly at like 2 or 3-0 down, I thought it would be like really negative in the stands. And obviously that, people weren't happy. And we were stood, I think, we were in the stand in sort of singing bit above the tunnel. So probably in and around where maybe the hardcore are. But it wasn't even really negative. It was more just like apathy. It was more like, no, we're used to being absolutely crap. We're still going to sing because this doesn't shock us. And like Tigo said, not just the players. Like you look at the managers, you've got Eddie Howe and Mad Dog Jason Tyndall on the sidelines, like barking instructions and making all these hand signals, etc., to their team. And then you just got Erik Ten Hag with his coat on, hands in his pocket, like chin under his zip, just looking at the floor basically, and hardly moved. He's like a mannequin the whole game. So it's definitely an issue, isn't it, from top to bottom? But you still have to say that tactically, United are absolutely shocking in every single department. And another thing I'll say is, having watched them live, if there is a problem there, I don't think Harry Maguire is the biggest one. I thought he was one of the better players for United on Wednesday night, to be honest with you. But yeah, second string v second string. So obviously can't get too carried away with it. But what's that? An 8th defeat of the season, I think, now for Man United, and no sign of it turning around anytime soon, I don't think.
I actually think that the second string versus second string is a problem though, because I think Man United's there's always been a little bit of a defense of Man United this season of, oh, well, we've not had Wan-Bissaka, we've not had Varane, we've not had Martinez, we've not had Shaw. That's our back four. If any other side had their whole back four out, then they'd be equally as struggling. But this was a genuine second string versus second string, where it just kind of proved the actual players are so down in the culture of it. I've seen something on Twitter or X yesterday or late last night, which is that Ten Hag's having one-to-one meetings with the players over yesterday and today to find out kind of what's wrong and things like that. And that just seems to me like last minute desperation, doesn't it? Where you're getting your players into one-to-one meetings to be like, what's going on? What do we think we can change and that sort of thing. So I've also seen that they're waiting to, I know it keeps going back to kind of the ownership and this culture top to bottom, but apparently like they're really trying to get through this Jim Ratcliffe move and see what this Ineos kind of culture and way of working is going to be and what that means for Ten Hag, whether they're having him, whether they think his job's in trouble, whether they're actually really happy to give him time. So yeah, Ten Hag must be getting zero sleep.
Murph, just another thing to say is United did, to be fair to them, they did play with 10 men because Martial didn't play, did he?
No,
he just wasn't involved at all. And Newcastle, we were thinking like they probably won't want to risk Wilson from the start and Isaac's injured. Who are they going to start up front? They played Anthony Gordon through the middle, and the difference between even him, who's a wide player really, and Martial, who's supposed to be a striker for United, albeit spent time on the sides as well, it was just chalk and cheese. Like he was like a marauding midfielder who just wouldn't let anything die, chased everything, made some really good runs. If you watch the Willock goal, where Willock in itself is poor. He dispossesses Amrabat and just waltzes from the halfway line to the edge of the box before he scores. But in front of him, Anthony Gordon's making a run, taking a defender the other way. And little things like that. Martial doesn't do it. No space is created for Man United because no one's making these runs. It's whether they don't want to or whether they're just not good enough and haven't got the footballing brains to see it. I don't know. But there's little incidences all over the pitch all game where Newcastle just showed up United in a massive way in terms of how to play football, basically. And any possession that Man United did have was fruitless, and nothing was ever going to come of it. And I can't remember any chances really for United at all.
Yeah.
No.
Just a quick story before we move on, and I think it sums up United's malaise as a club quite well, and that is the signing of Antony. At the start of last summer, Ajax wanted 60 million quid for him. And the United hierarchy turned around and said, no, that's way too much. He's not worth that. So we're not going to come in for him. United then go on and lose their first two games of the season, and it's panic stations. And Erik Ten Hag digs his heels in and said, no, this is a player I want. So Ajax said, okay, well, if you want him now, you can have him for 80, 90 million. And United panic and say, yeah. And that just sums it up from top to bottom. We've overspent. Well, I reckon Anthony's not even worth 50 million, but we've overspent 20 million in the space of 2 months just because sort of the planning is not there. The recruitment, the level of recruitment's not there. And United back themselves into a corner where you have no choice but to back your manager because obviously he was only there that was only 2 months into his reign. But yeah, from top to bottom, terrible. Anthony Martial's on 250 grand a week, which is honestly, Murph, you would have done a better job than him on Wednesday. It was dreadful, and it's severely depressing as a United fan.
Yeah, it is, but we say it every week, Tomo, and I think that just highlights that kind of what we've spoken about the difference in clubs at the minute. Newcastle, it does man for man, those teams in regards to raw ability and money spent and that sort of thing would have been way less than United's. But you look at the way that, Willock, people like that. I mean, Eddie Howe touched on Kraft, who's not played kick to football in a couple of years, just coming in and looking Rolls Royce for 90 minutes, just complete chalk and cheese how those two clubs are run at the minute. So, and you've got to praise up Newcastle. We always sit and slag off Man United, but they're just getting turned over by way better football clubs and sides at the minute, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, just quickly, I wanted to say that Tino Livramento was so good that I think that that's a big problem for them moving forward because obviously Trippier's their captain and best player really. So it'd be interesting to see how Tino can get more games because he was that good and he got man of the match in the in the previous round against Man City. He got man of the match against United. He was like unbelievable. But that's another example of their sort of recruitment and their squad planning. You've got a young up-and-comer who might not be kicking down doors because he's not playing every single minute. And then you've got an experienced Kieran Trippier who over the next couple of years may get eased out, but that will do his career good because his career longevity good because he won't be playing every single minute of every game. So that's another sign of how different clubs are run.
I think Livramento is going to end up playing a lot in midfield this year. Obviously, now they've lost Tonali as well for the season. He's so good on the ball. And I remember the first time I ever watched Livramento was for Southampton in a pre-season friendly a couple of years ago. And he played midfield for Southampton that day. It might have been against Chelsea where he came from. Can't remember now, but he was unbelievable. And like they won 1-0 and it came from like this beautifully threaded pass. And if you look at the first goal on Wednesday, Livramento picks it up at right back, but just marauds straight through the entirety of Man United and then has the presence of mind to find the ball into Wan to set up the first goal. So I actually think there's room for Livramento. They might try him at left back. They can use him sort of fleetingly with Trippier at right back, but I think there's a space for him in that midfield at points as well this season. And just to quote, T-Girl's sort of use of the word microcosm, you talk about Anthony costing however many millions of pounds. Well, Newcastle started a 34-year-old Matt Ritchie on the right-hand side on Wednesday night, and they won the game 3-0. So, like you say, it's individuals, but it's the whole thing collectively, isn't it? Which is the problem.
Yeah, I saw we've I suppose we've obviously got a couple mates who are Newcastle fans. I saw one of them had retweeted something about Matt Ritchie at 34 years old. I think he went and ran like 10 kilometers in that game, like was just all over the place. Played really well, and that's just kind of the sign of it. Great point on Livramento as well, and also I know you touched on him, but Lewis Hall as well. They're like recruiting 2 years ahead or a year ahead, Newcastle, aren't they? Which is a great place to be. Whereas United are very reactionary to we need people in these positions now. They've already got Lewis Hall and Livramento for the next 5 years, who might be their left and right back for that next sort of 5 to 10 years period. But also both look equally capable of stepping into midfield, which fullbacks tend to do now. So great.
Yeah. So just quickly on that arguably that Saudi Arabia's best signing at Newcastle has been Dan Ashworth, because he's taken over the football side of it, and like you say, just completely runs the show that side of it. And they look like a well-run outfit.
And he was the guy from Brighton?
Yeah.
So you can see the value in having someone in that position that's fucking capable of doing a job that may be another area that Man United lacking massively.
I've seen that part of it, it's all sort of hearsay, but I've seen part of United's plan of this takeover, if Ratcliffe gets 25% and they take over football operations, is to get Dave Brailsford, who obviously did the Team GB cycling and coined all of that kind of 1% marginal gain stuff, is for him to take over kind of behind the scenes stuff like the culture and the science and all of that sort of thing. But I think, is it Paul Mitchell, Tomo, who has been like at Monaco and places like that as a football and sporting director, who then would take over that side. One of the criticisms of Ten Hag is he's had too much reign about which players come in for Man United, and maybe his talent ID's been a bit off with who he's ended up signing.
This is what is. There's a vacuum of leadership at United above the manager. So every single time we've brought in a manager, like people say, well, you back the manager. Like we bought in Mourinho's type of players, then we bought in Solskjaer type of players. Now we're bringing in Eric Ten Hag type of players, and it's because, like you just said, there's a complete vacuum of leadership above the manager. And that's all well and good if it's successful, but once it's not and it starts going wrong and you have to sack the manager, then the next manager's sort of sat in a dressing room with players he doesn't want. And there's no sort of forward planning, and anyway, look, come on.
Let's move on, because it's same every week with United. Boys, just to round up another result in the Carabao Cup and move on to, I'll quickly read through the quarterfinals. Just a shout out to West Ham, who beat Arsenal 3-1 to move forward to the quarterfinals. Great result for West Ham. Played really well, scored some good goals. Looked like Ramsdale had a bit of a shocker for one of them, so that won't do him any good. But Mikel Arteta came out, apologised, I think, after the game, said it was on him. He obviously relied on his second string, inverted commas, for a game like that because he needs squad rotation. And I think his kind of point is he doesn't want those players now coming and knocking his door down about getting their chance in the first team when they lose like that. But yeah, great result for West Ham, and that means quarter-final ties. So Chelsea...
that really pisses me off. That does. Why is he apologising? West Ham basically played their first team except for James Ward-Prowse and I think Kurt Zuma, and Arsenal play second string. Okay, it was a bad result, bad performance, but why are you apologising? Like, Arsenal, you're doing well this year. I just fucking hate this sorry culture of apologising for everything.
Is it a little dig at Ramsdale? Because Ramsdale played the game, didn't he? That was his first game back since Raya came in. Is it, look, told you, brought Ramsdale back in and lost 3-1. So making up for his massive lie earlier in the season, saying it was going to be like an in and out type thing.
I imagine he's probably looked at United going out, City going out, and then looking at the quarterfinals, albeit they would have gone to Liverpool in the next round with how the draw went, but maybe just thought, that was an opportunity for a trophy. Obviously, he's won FA Cups and things like that, Arteta, and they're in the title race and doing okay in the Champions League. But you say Pep's always liked ticking that trophy off in sort of February, March time, and getting that first one of the season and getting that winning mentality. So maybe he's just seen it as a bit of a opportunity lost. But yeah, so those quarterfinals, boys: Chelsea versus Newcastle, Everton versus Fulham. Really nice tie in regards to someone getting through to the semi-finals because Port Vale host Middlesbrough, so we'll have at very least a championship side in the semi-finals. So it'd be great for Michael Carrick if they can beat Port Vale. And then Liverpool host West Ham, which another big tie for West Ham. They're having to do it the hard way in cups once again. We'll move on to the weekend's Premier League action, and we've just spoke at length about Newcastle and touched on Arsenal as well. But Newcastle host Arsenal at St James's Park. Laurie, that looks like a massive fixture and a big hurdle for Arsenal.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about teams that fancy themselves as title challengers, there's a couple of fixtures every season that you look at and you think, oh, if you're going to win the league, you're probably going to have to go there and do something. And Newcastle's one of those that will be a good measure, I think, for how likely they are to go on and be competing for the title right up until the end of the season this year. Because if City was going to Newcastle, everyone would fancy City to win the game. But with Arsenal, you think to yourself, that's a 50-50 really. And they're probably going to have to come out of a bit of a life and death and hope to be on the right side of it. One thing I will say is, although I know it's the Carabao Cup and a lot of changes were made, the sort of aura around Newcastle coming off a win at Old Trafford is going to be a lot better than the feeling around Arsenal after losing 3-1 to West Ham and the manager coming out and apologising and almost creating a little bit of a divide in the first team players and the sort of second string backup players. So it'd be an interesting one to see how it plays out. I'm glad it's on telly. Newcastle 5:30 again Saturday. So congrats to the Saudis for prime time with that one. And yeah, I think that's just a game we can sit back, enjoy, see how it plays out, and it will give us a good indication of where probably both sides are, but certainly Arsenal's title credentials. And I'm really struggling to, I won't be betting on that game because I'm struggling to think which way I think that's going to go. I think any result is possible and nothing would be surprising.
Come on.
Yeah, I fancy Newcastle just for the St James's Park effect. Like Laura just said, both the teams will be coming in there opposite sides of the scale, if you know what I mean. Although Arsenal play their first team, so I suppose they won't be too affected by the West Ham result. Callum Wilson hasn't scored in his last 9 league games against Arsenal. So he's got a bad record there. And obviously we spoke about in the podcast before, didn't we, about him getting a goal every 60 minutes in the Premier League. So basically him coming up against a bogey team in terms of goal scoring in great form. And obviously I think he only got 5 minutes against United. So he'll be fit and firing, ready to go. I was just having a look at the head-to-heads and Arsenal. I know head-to-head's not the be-all and end-all, especially considering Newcastle's new ownership's only been there a couple years, but Arsenal basically always beat Newcastle to 0. They've kept 30 clean sheets against Newcastle in the Premier League, which is the most by any club ever. So it'd be interesting, but I just fancy Newcastle, like you say, coming off the back of a famous win at Old Trafford and the St James's Park effect. And like you say, 5:30, going to be a cauldron. Yeah, I fancy Newcastle.
Yeah, I completely agree that it would be a cauldron. Newcastle will be up for it. The only thing I would say is obviously with maybe getting carried away with them taking apart United midweek, they've still got quite a few first team injuries, haven't they? So it's going to be full strength versus as full strength as you can be. And there's a few missing for Newcastle, but yeah, just has a feeling that Newcastle will grind one out there. They normally, I know they're always on at 5:30, but it's normally that sort of like get a decent win at St James's Park, and then the crowds bounce in. They got the music playing, and they're all doing a lap of the pitch. So yeah, I can just envisage that. And I think obviously teams like Spurs, Arsenal, and Man City will be looking at that as a potential drop points for Arsenal. So yeah, I will agree with you with that. Just touched on Spurs there. They host Chelsea, which has always been a bit of a fiery game in the past. Two teams on kind of different ends of the spectrum at the minute in terms of points and performances. Tomo, fancy Spurs at home there against Chelsea?
Yeah, I do really, just because basically that there's basically just because Spurs are better. It's as simple as that. You can dress it up as much as you want, but Chelsea seem to be good between the boxes, but haven't got that killer instinct. We spoke a lot about them and Nico Jackson's flaws, I suppose, and Tottenham didn't have a game midweek because obviously they're out of the Carabao Cup, so got a lot of rest, a lot of time on a training pitch, and they're at home. Just fancy Maddison and Sonny to do the business. I think Chelsea are a year off, basically, a year off being any good. Because they just how many sort of new players they've brought in and etc. So yeah, Spurs to win that one.
Yeah, I can't make a case for Chelsea winning that game at all. Like even like if they were playing like not a Villa, a good side this year, but a Villa or a Brighton or any of the sort of mid to upper half teams. Like normally there's a player where you think, oh, if he has a good day, it could be trouble. But Chelsea can't score a goal. And although they've got some good players in there in sort of Enzo and Sterling, I just don't think teams are looking at Nicholas Jackson and Cole Palmer and having kittens about it at all. And I think if Tottenham just go out and give an 8 out of 10 performance like they've been doing for most of the season, I think they'll just walk over Chelsea. And I think that could be like 3-0. And it's only because their name's Chelsea, we think it's a massive game. But really, they're a mid-table team, aren't they, at the moment, all things considered? So it's more like Tottenham v like Wolves or someone like that. And then you'd be thinking, well, it's definitely a Spurs win. So on paper, it looks a massive fixture. But yeah, I fancy Ange's men to march on. And I think they'll have much more difficult tests than Chelsea this season.
Yeah, and the only thing with Spurs is they do have a bit of they've got a terrible record against Chelsea. They've only won 2 of their last 14 games against Chelsea. But just these two teams are completely different. And yeah. I think Spurs have passed a lot of tests this season already, like we spoke about, and I think they'll pass this test as well.
And I saw Romero was up for Player of the Month as well. So we sort of talk a lot about Maddison and Son and even the midfielders, and I know we have touched on the whole of the team really, but he's obviously making an impression back at centre back. He looked really good when he came in, then maybe had some injury problems, but he looks like he's back to his best as well. So if they've got that spine going through the midfield of Romero, maybe Basuma, Maddison, Son, suddenly it's looking really, really decent. And every single time someone wins a league, you normally have that kind of spine of players. Thinking back to like Kompany, Toure, Aguero, or I don't know, Yapstam, Roy Keane, Andy Cole, whatever, Lampard, Terry Drogba. Normally you have that kind of bit through the middle of the park that you base your whole team and success around. And I think Tottenham are looking like they're somewhere near that at the moment, but sitting on the fence a little bit. I don't think they're quite at that kind of level, but good signs nonetheless.
Tomo, sorry to tread on your territory here, but I saw something yesterday that Sky Sports Premier League tweeted, which was how important are expected goals. So here's how Premier League teams would have won and lost if XG alone was the deciding factor, and Chelsea would be top of the league alongside Man City. They've had higher XG in 9 out of their 10 games and would have only lost one. Then you got Man City 9-1, Brighton and Newcastle 8-2, and then Arsenal, Brentford, Liverpool 7, and Tottenham 7-3. So the only thing for Chelsea is this whole putting the ball in the back of the net, isn't it? And I've seen Pochettino has come out and said Nico Jackson's in like a bad space at the minute, and talking about how he's in a bad run of form and things aren't going well for him, and he needs sort of a bit of the pressure taken off and that sort of thing. But I know we touched on it every week, but Chelsea are well in games, aren't they? They're creating chances. It's just putting the ball in the back of the net, which is obviously important, but that could be a tiny little glimmer of hope for them. Do you think
well, this Nkunku is going to be a big plus when he comes back. I'm not sure how far away he is, but those little stats there just makes me think. Well, your eyes don't lie to you, do they? Like, we all know that Chelsea have been quite good box to box in between, but they haven't been able to put the ball in the back of the net. So we're not saying that they're terrible. They create enough chances, they just can't finish them, and obviously the stats back it up.
And you touched on them kind of maybe being a next year side. Do you think that their ownership will be patient with Pochettino and be like, look, we just need to, like Arsenal did a couple of seasons, almost write off these seasons and give the manager time? Because I remember Arteta got fairly close, didn't he, to get in the boot, but managed to ride the storm. And now, look, do you think Pochettino get time?
Yeah, they've got no choice, really. I think I don't know how many years contract he's got, but I'm assuming it's above 5. Because they've given everyone else an 8-year contract. So yeah, unless it gets really toxic and really, really bad, then yeah. And it's his first season, so I wouldn't be panicking too much at Chelsea. You've got to remember what they come from last year. They were fucking awful. So there's been some encouraging signs. They just can't finish.
Yeah, you can identify the problem at Chelsea, can't you? They can't score goals. It's not the manager. He's got them playing quite well as well. You're not going to find anyone better than Mauricio Pochettino at the moment. Once they get it clicking in the forward areas, which probably means Nkunku coming back from injury and signing another striker, then there'll be a force. And then you can judge him with again, full deck of cards. But at the moment, he's handicapped a little bit, I think, just in those forward areas. And that's the problem. So there's no point changing the manager. Obviously, like you say, unless they start getting trounced every week.
Chelsea could be one viable option for Ivan Toney, isn't it? Where like their ownership's like trying to like price everyone out the water and be like, yeah, he's 100 mil now or 80 mil in the summer. That Todd Bowley might just be like, oh yeah, all right, here you go then. We'll have him in Jan. And that could be some goals for them. So yeah, interesting game. I do agree with you boys. I think Spurs will win that comfortably, just the trajectory that those two sides are on. But there is hope there for Chelsea and Chelsea fans. Move on. So another game, Forest host Villa. We've had a couple of requests from listeners about speaking a little bit more about Villa, and probably rightly so. I think we have mentioned some of them and their good form and how Emery's got them, but probably speak about them in a bit more detail. Loro, aside, absolutely flying at the minute in Villa. Just a bit on them, and if you fancy them away at Forest.
Well, yeah, definitely fancy them away at Forest. I think the big sort of running positivity for Villa at the moment is their home form. Is it 12 in a row now, I think, which is very, very good for any team. So if you can make your home ground a fortress, one, it means the positivity around the place is going to be sky high because everyone's seeing winning football every week. And two, obviously the points accumulate and you start looking like a good side. And like I said last week, they're 5 points above 6th place, lying in 5th. That's sort of almost dizzy heights for Villa. But they're a club that kind of have been threatening to do something for a while now. I think sort of even in the Gerrard era, when they started signing players like Coutinho, you could see the ambition was there, and maybe not the right personnel all over. But obviously the introduction of Unai Emery, he's come in. Yes, they've got a very good squad, well balanced, good experience, good youth, good defensive options, good attacking options. They look good all over the park. But the introduction of Unai Emery, a manager who's obviously sort of had his ups and downs, but at quite a high level in Europe and in domestic form as well. He's doing a very good job. And I read an article this morning from Jamie Carragher saying Villa's biggest problem at the minute is he's almost doing too good a job. And the next time a big club in Europe need a manager, he's probably going to be back on the radar. I know he's already been to some top clubs before and he sort of had to come back down to earth a little bit with his Villarreal days, and now Aston Villa. But are they going to be able to scathe off, Chelsea or Real Madrid or whoever might be looking for a manager in the next 6 months who are in European competitions and have a sort of a bigger history than Villa? So that'd be interesting to see. But at the moment, they seem to be a team that have got players in form all over the pitch. Every single week, if you look at Villa's fixture, you never think they're going to lose, no matter who they're playing. And long may it continue, because it's good to see some new blood in that top 6, and I fancy them to go close to getting a European spot this year. But hopefully the home form can continue, and maybe if they can, they definitely need to be beating teams like Forest away if they want to be taken seriously in terms of a European contender. But I think they will comfortably this weekend, and look forward to seeing the Villa train roll on.
Tomo?
Yeah, kind of agree. With the thing is with Unai Emery, and I think over the course of his career, I know what you're saying. Like, if a Real Madrid comes in, you can't ever say no to Real Madrid, I guess. But over the course of his career, if you look at his stint at maybe PSG and Arsenal, 2 of the big clubs, it's not quite worked out for him. Whereas he's just on that level below with your Sevilla, Villarreal, and now Villa, where he's making almost like he's better off at clubs who aren't quite at that level, because the expectations aren't that you need to win every single match in the league. And obviously he's got a very good record in cup competitions, so it'd be interesting to see how Villa get on in the Conference League. I wonder if he's at that stage of his career where he's just like, no, this is me now, and I'm happy at a club like Villa. And at the end of the day, Villa are no paupers, are they? I think their owners are like the 2nd or 3rd richest in the whole of the league, behind Saudi and City. So they've got some serious money and serious ambition. So I don't see them having too much of an issue keeping hold of him, because their ambition, like the club's ambition, matches his. And they're already in Europe now, aren't they? So
and to be fair, getting in Europe, but obviously becoming a consistent European team from the Premier League, which Villa will want to do. But in response to that Carragher article, one of the Villa fans put, "That's a bit lazy. You haven't looked into it enough." And was basically saying that Unai Emery has basically been given full control at Aston Villa, which maybe ties up with not big fish, small pond, but he prefers to be at a club where he's the big name rather than having to go and prove himself at a bigger club. And like you say, maybe he's found a place in Villa where he's going to have a similar sort of budget to maybe the top teams, but will also have more autonomy to do what he wants and implement everything that he wants to happen than maybe he would at a top European club. So maybe it is just, square pegs and square holes. And if it is, that's a very good sign. But I'm just looking at the team that played last week in the bench. They've just got quality all over the pitch, really. So they are going to be a nightmare for anyone to play against, particularly in this sort of positive vein of form that they've got, not just on the pitch, but off it with the fans, and this sort of momentum building up from the 12 home wins in a row. So, be interesting to see who is the first team to beat them at Villa Park this season, but you wouldn't be surprised if it's a little longer until that happens.
Yeah, and just a quick one on Forest. They've sneakily had a bit of a dead run. They haven't won a game since September the 2nd.
Yeah.
So I think they drew a couple in that time, but they actually haven't won a game since they beat Chelsea. So the pressure's building a little bit on Cooper, I think.
He rode the storm so well last season, didn't he? That I think while they're going as they are, he'll be fine. But they've had a couple of bad ones, haven't they? I think they were winning against Luton, weren't they? And then managed to concede late. Drew with Palace, drew with Brentford, drew with Burnley. And as I say, if those draws are bookended by losses, then they look like drop points, don't they? As opposed to potentially okay results. So he'll be looking for a win there. Just on Villa as well, I think touched on the amount of money that their ownership has got. I therefore think that they won't be pressured into having to sell players. They'll name big prices for your likes of your Ollie Watkins, your Dougie Luizes. They obviously brought Diaby in, who's balling now as well. It's like they don't necessarily need to sell them. And while they're playing like they are, and hopefully they're in the Conference League this year, they'll maybe be looking at, can we get into definitely Europa this year? But if there's going to be 5 places for the Prem for Champions League, sneak that Champions League space, then the players might not want to leave either. They've got a good structure there, big side, big fan base. So yeah, great times to be a Villa fan. And I agree. I think they'll go and win at Forest, and they've got some decent looking fixtures coming up as well. So that's the 2 p.m. kickoff on Super Sunday. The 4:30 is at Kenilworth Road, and Liverpool go to Luton. This is a game I am shitting myself about because I don't have Salah in my fantasy team. And I think that sounds like one of those games where you'll just see that someone in your league's got him captain and he goes and scores 5 there. Can Tomo give me any kind of reason why Luton will get anything at home to Liverpool?
I'm going to back Luton. And there's no logical reason because everything in the form and Liverpool obviously great at the minute. I just think at one stage this year, Luton will get a big win at Kenilworth Road against a big club. So, and it most likely it will be against Man United, but but just because it's 4:30 on a Sunday, I just fancy Luton to just come up with like a third round FA Cup giant killing shocking performance. So yeah, but don't bet on it.
We certainly won't be betting on that horseshit prediction. You're right. Them beating Man United isn't comparable, is it, to them beating Liverpool at the moment? And they've had a famous FA Cup third round game against Liverpool in the past. And you might remember Xabi Alonso scoring from the halfway line at Kenilworth Road, and that's probably one of his most famous goals to be scored at Kenilworth Road. So, if they are going to have a big win at home this season against a big side, I really don't think it's going to come against an in-form Liverpool 2.0 reloaded that are on fire on all fronts at the moment. They had a good win in the Carabao Cup away at Bournemouth in the week. And I don't think Liverpool are in the mood to be taking any prisoners at the moment. I think that'd be a bit of a rollicking, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I've had to bring Simicast in because that's all I can afford to do in the FPL side in the hope that he can get some assists and a clean sheet. Just quickly before we move on, do you see Darwin Núñez's goal in the Carabao Cup? Is there anything more Darwin Núñez than a long ball coming in from Trent and him miscontrolling it and it looking like it's running out and the fans starting jeering at him? So he decides to just cut in and bend it in from about 30 yards with an absolute thunder bastard, just straight in, just as Darwin Núñez as it gets that in that.
Captain Chaos. Yeah, but you know what? He must be so hard to defend against because there's just I don't even think he knows what he's doing. No. Let alone sort of predicting what he's doing. So yeah.
I love Núñez. Love watching him. I'd love to have him in my side. And they've got options. He doesn't have to play every minute of every game, but great option to have just to have a bit of like he can do 4 things crap, but then he can pick it up on the touchline and smash it into the top corner or do what he did against against Newcastle earlier on in the season and just win them the game.
Yeah.
Pick up 3 points. So it's great to have someone like that in the ranks.
Yeah, United were linked so heavily with him, and then all of a sudden Liverpool just did what decent sides do and just pounced and got him, and I was really gutted. And then you watched him in his first season; he obviously had that red card, didn't he, for the headbutt, and then was missing chances, and you thought we've dodged a bullet there. But the more that you see him, you just think how perfect he'd be at somewhere like United, just someone with a proper bit of fire in his belly, bit of passion, and on the cusp of being brilliant. But actually saying that, someone who's on that cusp, maybe Man United isn't the right club because it only tends to go one way at United for that. We will quickly touch on it. So lunchtime tomorrow, Tomo, we go to Craven Cottage. I think a place we went last year, and Garnacho kind of burst on the scene with a 96th minute winner. I think we won't labour on United too much, but really, really, really important for Ten Hag that United come away with 3 points there.
Yeah, well, I think no matter really what happens on Saturday, the writing's on the wall. To be honest, we've lost 5 out of 10 Premier League games, haven't we, so far? Which is their most defeats from the opening 10 games of a league campaign since 1986. So breaking records this season. I just can't see like the way we played on Wednesday. Definitely for me, it feels like the players are down in tools, and even the players that Ten Hag has fully backed, and like your Anthony's, and Mason Mount, he's supposed to be his like they look like they're not trying to lick for him. So, and Fulham got a good win in the week, didn't they? Against inform Ipswich. and it's at Craven Cottage. I fancy Fulham, which is, I know it's depressing, but yeah.
Yeah, they're over 2-1, Loro, at home against Man United. Is that the sort of odds you'd like the look of for Fulham?
Yeah, that is the sort of odds I like the look of, Mouth. I fancy Fulham. I don't think that'd be an upset. I will be surprised if Man United win that game.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which is saying something, isn't it? I just, got a good manager in Marco Silva. I know they've been a little bit modest their start of the season, Fulham, and maybe lacking goals themselves, but I could see that being like 3-0. Genuinely, I think Fulham can just go and batter United tomorrow, and it'll be another one of those kind of the heads go further down and everyone trudging off the pitch, just waiting for the manager to be sacked. I feel like we're in that period of this cycle of United now, where it's just the players walk off the pitch quick as possible, just wait for the manager to be sacked, and we'll wait for the next honeymoon period to paper over the cracks.
Yeah, you're right. You can kind of see it, can't you? That sort of at Craven Cottage at the end, where it's like Ten Hag in front of the fans and like one other player, and then like it's like, look, Captain Fernandez has trudged down the tunnel without even applauding the fans and stuff like that. United have got a little run of fixtures now, which I think he needs to win all of. They are Fulham, Luton, and Everton, and then they've got Copenhagen as well. In the Champions League, and I honestly don't think he can slip up in any of them. I don't think it's suddenly going to be win on Saturday and it's pressure off. I think it could be the next loss is when United start really starting to think about it. But who on earth they'd bring in as manager remains to be seen. But yeah, I completely agree. I think Fulham will beat United there. I think they'll do it fairly comfortably. I just don't know who's going to put the ball in the back of the net for either side in that game. Little roundup of the rest of the games. Everton host Brighton. I think Brighton would have been firm favourites for that for large parts of this season, but Everton look like they've turned a corner, don't they, Laura? And you touched on DCL, Calvert-Lewin and Jack Harrison potentially being a little partnership that could get Everton out of trouble there. And Calvert-Lewin started putting the ball in the back of the net.
Yeah, and I hope Everton do win that, because last season when Leeds needed Brighton to do us a favour against Everton, they decided to lose 5-0. So don't be going to Everton and winning now, Brighton. They've got your number. And yes, Dominic Calvert-Lewin is a game changer. I said it earlier. So sometimes it's just in these sort of mid-table Premier League teams that can go south or north is depicted by their best player being fit. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin is that focal point for them. And he brings everyone else into it rather than just having Decore up there with... I mean, by the way, how's your man Beto getting on? Well, I mean, I've not even heard the name for the last 2 months, but yeah, yes, you're quite right. I'm not sure I fancy Everton to win that game. Facetiousness aside, I think obviously Brighton a better side, but once they've got that Calvert-Lewin focal point with the bringing everyone into play, they're a much harder team to play against, and maybe Goodison Park can go back to being somewhere near the fortress or a hard place to go that it used to be. So difficult game for Brighton, but one that I would expect them to win, as I did last year.
I think Beto's been an absolute masterstroke in regards to come in and giving Dominic Calvert-Lewin something to think about keeping his place in the side or regaining it, and it's lit a fire under Calvert-Lewin. So complete masterstroke from Everton and Dyche, and yeah, it looks like Beto's going to play a major part in keeping Everton safe this year. So well done to the big man. Couple of other fixtures, boys. So Man City beat Bournemouth 6-0. That's on tomorrow, so get all your money on Haaland for a hat-trick and maybe even triple captain him. Brentford versus West Ham, which looks a decent London derby and decent fixture. Burnley host Palace. Again, Vincent Kompany desperate for a win there and will need to get that against Palace. And then Sheffield United versus Wolves. Again, Sheffield United gaffer be looking desperate for a win there, but Wolves are looking in decent form and fancy them to go and get something at Bramall Lane. We'll move on to the Championship, boys, and Pyramid Pod Cup. So we touched on Southampton, obviously winning and getting the cup in their hands. They're unbeaten in 6. They go to Millwall, who've drawn 3 of their last 4 games. Laura, interesting point on Millwall is that their new manager hunt is continuing unless anything's happened this morning. But a familiar name for Yeovil fans in Nathan Jones linked for the job there. Just thoughts on that move if it materialises?
I can see the logic, because I guess Millwall may be not too far away from Luton in regards to smaller Championship London club with probably more of a modest budget than a lot of teams. And you look at what Nathan Jones did with Luton, in both of his spells there, and it was very impressive. So maybe they're thinking he can come in, maybe not on a shoestring budget, but be more of an on-the-grass manager and make Millwall into a very difficult team to beat and pick up results that way. It's just, the problem is with Nathan Jones is anywhere other than Luton, and I'm talking about Stoke and in particular Southampton, but both were really bad spells. He's shit the bed, for want of a better expression. So his next job is probably going to define his career, I think, because you've got 2 very good spells at Luton and 2 absolute train wrecks at bigger clubs. Millwall is obviously more in the mould of Luton, and I can see why it would be an appointment that makes some logic in some headspaces, but he's going to have a lot to prove because obviously his most recent stint was going up to Southampton and or going down to Southampton and talking about how, he could have stayed in Wales and married a nice little Welsh girl, but he wanted to push himself into the Premier League, and that's why he went there and lost every game and lasted 5 minutes. So, points to prove for Nathan Jones, but Millwall, I can see it.
And just, Tomo, on that game, fancy Southampton to continue to hold the cup, or fancy it to move over to the Den for a spell?
I fancy Southampton. They've hit a run of form, haven't they? Flynn Downs is playing well at the minute. I think he's got himself into the team. Obviously, they've got Armstrong up front. Southampton favourites, and I think Southampton win.
Happy days. It's quite nice, actually, that we're starting to get to the point of the FA Cup starting up. So whichever of those championship sides have got it will then hopefully we'll be looking out for a bit of a cup set against a League One or League Two side for the cup when that comes round. So keep an eye on that one. A couple of other fixtures to talk about in the Championship. Tonight is first place Leicester hosting third place Leeds. Laurie, you must be absolutely buzzing for that one. Think Leeds can go and get something there?
Yeah, definitely. I think just sit back and enjoy that one. That would be a great advert for the Championship. I think that's 2 of the strongest sides that the Championship's seen in a long, long time. Leicester and Leeds both got it'd be really interesting to see how they set up tactically. You'd imagine Leicester are going to be aware that Leeds are very quick on the transition and breaking at the moment, not just with Somerville and James's pace, but Rutter's link-up play has been something to behold this season. So it will be intriguing to see whether they push the button early and try and keep the onus on them as they're at home and top of the league to go for it. But let's be honest, the other thing for Leicester is it's a little bit of they're not going to want to lose the game, but they've got so much breathing space. They don't really have that sort of jeopardy feeling of, if we lose this, then Leeds are going to be breathing down on next. We need to win about 5 games and then lose 5 games to be in contention. So it's not going to be one that swings the season, but you never know. It could be one that starts a run or stops the rot, or the opposite of stopping the rot for Leicester and maybe sets them in. T-Gal's brother just texted me and asked me if there was any value in these tonight. I looked at the odds and we're 2-1, and I think that's probably about right. You wouldn't want to put us too high because we've got a lot of quality and could beat anyone in that league on our day. But at the same time, Leicester have won every single game bar one and look magnificent. So don't know what the score's going to be. I think I've told a few of the boys this season, this week, I fancy 3-3. But that's just me sitting on the fence thinking there's going to be lots of goals. It'll be a good game and you can't really pick which way it goes. Obviously hoping for a Leeds win. But yeah, just sit back and enjoy it because that's going to be a really good occasion for the Championship.
Yeah. I think that could be that could be a perfect storm for Leeds, where you just said there, like your counter-attacking sort of type of players like Somerville, James, obviously Nonto, he didn't start today on the weekend, but he come on. If you can get those players playing, because you'd expect Leicester to dominate possession. So I think it could be a perfect storm where you just hit and run on the counter attack and get a couple. Yeah, so I'm really interested to see that game tonight.
Yeah, I hope Leeds go on and win that just for the sake of the Championship. You've boys have touched on Dan James, Somerville. Laurie spoke about Rutter on a previous pod as well. He looks a bit of a cheat code, and then Joel Pirro is obviously scoring as well. So I just really hope that front four all click and they go and get something. And as you say, maybe just sets a bit of a rot in place for Leicester to drop a few points and just bridge that gap between first and second and the rest of the league, because obviously there's loads of teams chomping at each other's heels at that bit, but just a bit of a gap opening up between the top two.
He is due a goal though, Pirro. You say he's scoring. He hasn't scored in a while, actually. For someone of his caliber and for someone who scored more championship goals than anyone else in the last 2.5 years, it's okay whilst we're winning, but I do want to see him score soon. And we have got Patrick Bamford, Willie Gnonto, Jaden Anthony on the bench as well. So lots of options to change it as and when and freshen up if we need to. But just to sort of, I don't know, stamp the card a little bit, I have noticed that Pirro hasn't scored in a while. But what a place it would be to go and do it at the King Power tonight.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I think I've seen, Leeds have scored 4 against Huddersfield and 3 at Norwich. But if he's not scored in that and his last goal was against Bristol City, then yeah, he is probably overdue one with what his goal record looks like. So hopefully tonight for Joel. We just touched on the top 2 sides, obviously building a bit of a gap for the rest of the league. Ipswich go to Birmingham, where Rooney is now absolutely desperate for a winner at Birmingham, and that just keeps looking worse and worse. That move, but Ipswich obviously go to Birmingham, and I think again the rest of the league will be looking for Birmingham to try and get something there, and that might be what kickstarts Rooney's time in charge at Birmingham if they can beat Ipswich there. And then another game, 5th v 7th, West Brom versus Hull. I think 2 teams who've spoken about a little bit in the pod about West Brom keeping a good side and Rossini doing a good job at Hull, but again one of those games where a win kind of might trajectory them up towards 3rd or 4th in the table, but a loss and suddenly you're in 9th or 10th, just with the beauty of how the league is there. So a couple of intriguing games there across the championship, and we'll be looking forward to seeing who comes out on top on those. Just before we move on, just wanted to touch, Lauro, on Bristol City. So a side that is fairly close to us geographically. They're obviously sacked Nigel Pearson and they're looking for a new manager. 2 names that seem to be strong contenders for that is Eustace, who obviously we've spoken about with Birmingham before, but also looks like Frank Lampard in the mix there, which is a bit more of a big name, but's had a mixed time as manager. Just thoughts on which way they'll go for that and which one he thinks best.
I think John Eustace would be the better fit. Again, I've seen the kind of criteria they're looking for is an on-the-grass manager, and obviously they've been hampered with their budget a little bit in recent years, and they've had to sort of rely on bringing youngsters through, but they've done that very well. And some of their best players are those players now. And I think John Eustace has particularly been in the Championship this season and already done well, would fit the bill perfectly for them. But Frank Lampard's 1 to 4 on. It sounds like he's got the job, which I think is a hell of a roll of the dice. I mean, I actually quite rated Frank Lampard when he was Derby manager, albeit I didn't like how his season culminated in knocking Leeds out of the playoffs. But he did quite a good job there. But he did a good job there with Mason Mount on loan, Harry Wilson on loan, Fikayo Tomori on loan. It's not going to be like that at Bristol City. This is a team where you need to go in and get players overachieving to try and build Bristol City up the league, because Nigel Pearson's been sacked because they don't think being 15th in the Championship is good enough. Well, if you don't want to be 15th in the Championship, you are going to have to overachieve as Bristol City, because everyone else has got a lot more money to spend on players than they have. So, I think Eustace would be the best fit, but Lampard's obviously a big name, a roll of the dice, and he did do a decent job in the Championship, I think, before, but it was 4.5 years ago, and it was with a completely different set of circumstances financially.
Yeah, the one thing I've noticed about Lampard, I don't know if you boys agree with me, is over his 4 years as a manager, I've noticed that every time they lose, he always talks about his players as them, as a separate thing from him. And every time they win, he's like, "We won." And I just think, I know that's a small detail, but I just don't like the way. I can't see him creating this really good us versus the world mentality in a dressing room. And yeah, I don't see, if he does get it, which I do expect him to get because of the fact he's a bigger name, he'll be able to probably, you like to think he'd be able to attract some sort of good loan signings from Chelsea potentially. But yeah, other than that, I can't see him doing a good job.
No, I just worry about Frank Lampard's temperament to be a manager. I mean, and that sort of fits in with what you're saying as well. But particularly at Everton, and even at Derby to some extent, when I remember the big Spygate thing with Bielsa, you can see he gets rattled easily. And then at Everton, you could see that with the pressure, he looked like a broken man week after week. And maybe that comes from experience because he's managed a few clubs now, but all very different jobs. Derby, the Championship, Chelsea in the Champions League, Everton relegation battle. Maybe that will culminate in him being a much better manager now. But he speaks really well, Frank Lampard, and obviously has had a fantastic career and is going to gain the respect of the players in that regard. But I just think, is it that not getting too high with the highs, not getting too lows with the low bit that he struggles with a little bit? But if he goes to Bristol City, we shall see.
The only thing I say with Lampard as well is I question whether he's someone, and this goes out to most big names who maybe drop down a few divisions to manage, is when you're so used to standards and quality of his playing days that he had at Chelsea. And I even think when he was in charge at Chelsea, he touched on this towards the end of his tenure, that training's completely different. You think, he used to have sort of your Terrys, your Essien, Shevchenkos, all of the Balaks, all of these people who probably were so on it in training and like driving this kind of culture of like high performance, and like everything was so like to the highest level possible. Can you then go and get a group of players who play a way lower standard than you have, and probably what Lampard in his head still thinks he's capable of, and get them going and accept that they're not going to be at that absolute elite Chelsea level? And I think he struggled with that with all sides he's been at, because Chelsea, when he's been in charge of them, have never been that old Chelsea level. Everton was obviously relegation. Derby did okay at, admittedly, but I think that's the biggest concern for him. And I think Bristol City would be way better off going with Eustace than Lampard, but it looks like they're going to go with Lampard, so we will see how that pans out for them. No League One or League Two action this weekend, boys, as it's the first round proper of the FA Cup. Laurie, we'll come to you in a minute to talk about Yeovil, but there's one game that I've seen that's on Sunday lunchtime, which looks really interesting. That's Portsmouth go to Chesterfield. Chesterfield absolutely running away with it in the National League, or certainly picking up some massive wins in that league, and look like they'll be going up. But Portsmouth obviously flying as well in League One. So everyone talks about the quality of National League. We're seeing that Wrexham and Notts County stepping up and doing the business in League Two as well. Might be a bit of a bridge too far for them against Portsmouth, but I think that'll be a really interesting game at lunchtime. Laura?
Yeah, I agree. And you're right. I think in the last few years particularly, it feels like the gap between National League and League One isn't as big. And you've had some players that have been willing to come down, like your Paul Mullins, to go, I know, slightly different Wrexham, but Paddy Madden did the same. Lots of players seem to jump between League One, League Two, and the National League a lot more freely than they used to. And Chesterfield are a very, very good side who would be running away with the league if it wasn't for Barnet, who are kind of keeping pace with them. And Portsmouth are obviously, I think, 26 games unbeaten now, which is one of the longest runs, I think, ever in the EFL, in the top 10, I think I saw they broke into the other day. So, yeah, you're right. That's a very interesting game. And it will be, I mean, dependent on how important each team views it as to who starts for them, I suppose. With obviously league campaigns to think about, both being sat top of the league. But yeah, that does stand out as a bit of a mouthwatering one, and it will be interesting to see how Chesterfield compete against obviously the best League One side at the moment.
Yeah, and then just another one to talk about, Laura. Yeovil hosting Gateshead, another National League side. Gateshead in action, going to Yeovil, but Yeovil obviously in great form, and Gateshead lost their management side, and their run of form's just starting to turn a bit. So, do you fancy Yeovil?
I don't know. I fancy a really, really good game though, if it's on, because obviously the weather down here has not been great at the moment. There is a pitch inspection today, but if it's on, one thing neither manager wants is a draw, because at this time of the year, particularly in Yeovil's league, the fixture congestion is absolutely massive. We're already Saturday, Tuesday. Yeovil have got a big game against Torquay on Tuesday, which they won't want rearranged because they've got to have a replay. And obviously both teams are at the other end of the country. It's like a 7-hour drive down, I think, from Gateshead to Yeovil. So if that's 0-0, I would be very, very surprised. I think you're just going to see two sides there absolutely go for it and think, if we lose, we lose. But if we win, we might as well do so in good style. So Mark Cooper said he's going to run on and score an own goal if it's 0-0 in the 90th minute. I genuinely think we'd rather lose than draw and go out to Gateshead on Tuesday night. So I'm expecting a good game if it's on.
Good stuff. Yeah. Well, get yourself to Hewish Park if you've got nothing else to do on a rainy Saturday afternoon tomorrow if the game's on. So we host Gateshead. Boys, we'll finish with the Pyramid Pod treble. Tomo, come to you first. I'm guessing you're going for Man City at 1-12 on home to Bournemouth.
Yeah, no. And this one's going to piss you boys off, but I'm going to go for Birmingham 3-1 at home to Ipswich.
Loro, treble's over, but go on.
So T-Girls just predicted that Ipswich are going to lose their second game of the season to Mooney Rooney's Birmingham. Which
is so this is all a bit of a procession for me and you, but
I'm going to go Rotherham at home to QPR. I think 13-8 is very good odds for a team playing QPR, wherever it is, but particularly at home. So yeah, I think that's good odds.
Brilliant. I'm going to go for Bristol City at home to Sheffield Wednesday. Sheffield Wednesday, obviously bottom of the league. Their owners only just paid their players their month's wages. Bristol City on the cusp of getting a new manager, so maybe players playing to get in Frank Lampard or Eustace Eye. I think 11-10 above evens at home to Sheffield Wednesday is unbelievable odds. So
that's 21. That's 21-1.
Unbelievable. So as Tomo said last week, if you put £10 on that, you will lose £10. But no, 220 quid back. It's about time we got one over the line. If Mooney Rooney's Birmingham can do the business, maybe we will win some much needed funds for the Pyramid Pod treble. Boys, that's all we got time for. We'll be back on Monday where we will review all of the Premier League, Championship and FA Cup action and look ahead to midweek Champions League. But pleasure as always, boys. Have a great weekend.
Cheers, boys.
Cheers, boys.